Russia claims to have seized control of the southern Ukrainian city Kherson. The city's mayor says Kherson is surrounded but still under Ukrainian control. Russian airborne troops have landed in Kharkiv. At least 21 people are reported dead, with more than 100 wounded due to shelling in the last 24 hours. There are reports of a new rocket attack in Kharkiv that has struck a university building in the city. President Biden has banned Russian planes from US airspace and is describing Vladimir Putin as a dictator. And almost 700,000 people flee to Ukraine. The UN says there's a desperate need for shelter, medical supplies and clean water.
A website that shows Iranian state television says it experienced technical difficulties on Tuesday. Activists reportedly played an anti-government video message on the service. In Sudan, resistance committees of young activists are organizing in Khartoum in an effort to protest military rule and gain support. In Ecuador, environmentalists say an oil pipeline broke Friday, causing a spill in the country's Amazon area that polluted water and endangered the environment. And in China, some sports competitions begin at the Beijing Winter Olympics as officials prepare for Friday's opening ceremony.
Officials from Kyiv and Moscow are trying to set a second round of talks as Russians push further into Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky is calling on Russia to first stop its military operations.
As for dialogue, I think yes. But stop bombarding people first and start negotiating afterwards.
The Russian side is thought to be demanding what it calls the demilitarization and neutralization of Ukraine. It's unclear whether both sides can narrow their differences through dialogue. The Kremlin says it's ready to send a delegation for talks near the Belarus-Poland border. But in Ukraine, the shelling continues. Russian forces have struck the main television tower in the capital. Missiles also hit the central part of Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv. Ukrainian authorities say more than 2,000 civilians have been killed since the invasion began on Thursday. A U.S. defense official said more than 80% of the Russian troops previously gathered on Ukraine's borders have now entered the country. Russia's defense ministry says they have taken control of the southern city of Kherson. Reports say Russian armored vehicles are nearing Ukraine's capital, but have struggled with refueling. The U.S. official says Russian troops may be losing momentum in the face of fierce resistance from Ukrainians. The official says some units have surrendered without a fight, and many of the Russians are conscripts without combat experience, some of whom were not even aware they were going into battle. The UN Refugee Agency says more than 870,000 people have fled Ukraine. It says the situation could become the largest refugee crisis this century.
Ми просимо, знаєте, допоможіть зупинити війну і допоможіть нам бути зі своїми родинами. Коби закінчить скорше, самі скорше, коби закінчилася війна. Ми нічого не винні, ми вже нікого не чіпали.
Protests against the invasion continue across the world, including in Russia. Human rights activists there say more than 6,400 demonstrators have been detained by police. Russia also faces additional sanctions. The European Union announced it will remove 7 Russian financial institutions from the SWIFT global payment network on March 12th. Russia's second largest VTB bank is on the list. The measure is expected to impede trade, further depress the ruble's value, and hurt the Russian economy. But the list does not include major banks linked to the energy industry. Japan will accept refugees fleeing the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
To show our solidarity with the people of Ukraine, we will accept those who fled from Ukraine to a third country.
Foreign Minister Hayashi Yoshimasa told Ukraine's ambassador to Japan that Tokyo will work with other G7 members and the wider international community for a ceasefire.
I was deeply moved to see Ukrainian people fight for their nation's sovereignty and independence. Please accept my heartfelt condolences for the victims of the Russian aggression.
Ukraine is facing a grave challenge now. On behalf of the people of my country, I express my deep gratitude for Japan's support.
An opposition lawmaker said at a Diet meeting the ambassador's request for an appointment with Hayashi went unmet for 1 month. The lawmaker accused the government of lax crisis management. Hayashi replied he was not aware of the request. Ukraine's ambassador told NHK there are ways to counter Russia's overwhelming military power.
We're not asking anybody to fight on our side. We understand it's our war. What we ask from our partners, that's weapons and political support and financial resources to surviving humanitarian crisis. They help in any possible way. So therefore, we believe we will survive. With partners and friends, we are not alone.
The International Paralympic Committee says athletes from Russia and Belarus will be allowed to compete in the upcoming Beijing Games, but only as neutrals. The committee members decided not to ban the athletes in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Instead, they banned the flags and anthems. Russian athletes were already set to compete for the Russian Paralympic Committee rather than Russia as punishment for their country's systematic doping. Now, they and athletes from allied country Belarus will take part under the Paralympic flag and anthem. Neither Russia nor Belarus will be included in the medals tables, and their delegation must cover any national symbols on their uniforms. Committee President Andrew Parsons issued a statement that described the move as the harshest possible punishment. He also said, "It is vital we show to world leaders through our sport that we can unite as human beings and that our true power is found when promoting peace, understanding, and inclusion." The Games are set to open on Friday. In Myanmar, more than a year after the coup, it's not only pro-democracy forces that are being suppressed by the military, it's also the media. Scores of journalists have been detained and tortured over the past year, pushing the media to the verge of collapse. NHK World's Inuma Satoshi reports.
This report was filed by Aung Chon of the Democratic Voice of Burma, a broadcaster critical of the junta. Immediately after the coup, he sent out reports from the front lines of the brutal military crackdowns on civilians. But 1 month later, when he was at home, he was taken away by the military. He was detained for nearly 8 months and was subjected to horrific torture. He says he is still suffering from headaches.
They kicked my face. They'd put cigarettes out on my face. One eye was so swollen that I couldn't open it. They would at times place a plastic bag over my head to suffocate me.
After being released, he escaped from the region with his family. He is still working online as a reporter, but has been unable to provide on-the-spot coverage of the situation.
Myanmar is currently in a media dark age. News journalists are being suppressed. Our citizens are no longer enriched with real news and information. The world is not told the truth of what's happening inside our country. The media is disappearing quickly, or should I say, is in complete decline.
Another media agency is the Voice of Myanmar. It was founded 4 years ago by reporter Nae Myo-ling and reached 1.4 million subscribers.
I wanted to start a media outlet that's not influenced by any outside entities. My wife and I used all the funds we had saved up.
However, the founder was detained by the military last April for giving anti-coup protesters a voice. After his release, he decided he should be careful when reporting on the coup. But then, he was criticized by pro-democracy activists, claiming the agency was pro-military, and started to get threatening messages.
It is really difficult to take a balanced and unbiased point of view. People's anger and discontent against the military has grown immensely. The media is stuck between the two sides and can't do anything.
Myanmar's media provides an essential insight into the situation there, but now it's feeling pressure from all directions. Inuma Satoshi, NHK World, Yangon.
Japan's coronavirus cases are down compared to last week, but the pace of decline is slowing and some areas are seeing an increase in infections. Tokyo authorities reported more than 12,500 new cases on Wednesday. They confirmed 31 deaths, the second highest number for a single day this year. New infections across the country topped 72,000. The 7-day tally through Tuesday dropped to 84% of the total for the previous week, but some areas such as Iwate Prefecture have seen an increase. The Japanese government held an experts meeting on Wednesday evening. Health Minister Goto Shigeyuki said infection levels in major cities are still high and the improvement in rural areas is weak. He warned that medical care systems are strained in many places and the occupancy rate of hospital beds for serious cases may continue to rise. 31 of Japan's 47 prefectures are now under so-called quasi-emergency measures aimed at containing infections. The restrictions will be in place until Sunday, and some major cities such as Tokyo and Osaka are asking for an extension. Other prefectures, including Hiroshima, have requested they be lifted. The Japanese government plans to make a decision on Thursday based on local government's requests. Large wildfires are raging in central Chile as dry and hot weather continues in the country. Our meteorologist Sayaka Mori has a look at the situation in world weather.
Hello there. A serious wildfires occurring in central Chile's Valparaiso. Take a look at this footage. Firefighters along the coast of Chile battled severe blazes on Monday and Tuesday. Authorities said strong winds were giving more fuel to the fires, making it challenging to contain. High temperatures and dry conditions in the area have worsened the situation over the past weeks. It looks like rain is not anticipated over the area, so conditions will likely remain that way. And rain is in the forecast for parts of northern Argentina. Northern Argentina is also experiencing days of dry conditions. Wildfires are occurring. Some of the smoke reached parts of Asunción on Monday. Thunderstorms are in the forecast in Asunción on Thursday with high of 34. Beautiful weather for you in Buenos Aires and rainy weather in Bogota on your Thursday. Meanwhile, heavy rain has been hitting the Pacific Northwest. The Olympics National Park had about 360 millimeters of rainfall in 2 days. Also, Seattle experienced the third wettest February day on record on Monday. More rain is in the forecast for the Pacific Northwest. Freezing rain is in the forecast in places like South Dakota as well as Montana. To the south of it, it's going to be warm, so be careful of spring flooding if you're in Idaho. Temperatures are going to be much warmer than normal in places like Denver, Oklahoma City. Chicago at 3 degrees. An extreme cold warning is in place in northern Ontario as well as Quebec. You could be feeling minus 45 degrees or so because of strong winds and also low temperatures on Thursday morning. Snow will return to northern Japan later this week, and temperatures are going to be as follows for the next 3 days in Japan. That's it for me. Have a nice day.
日付が変わって3月3日木曜日午前0時の NHK ニュースです。ウクライナへの軍事侵攻を続けるロシア軍は2日、黒海に面した南部の都市ヘルソンを掌握したと発表しました。ロシアは軍事的な圧力をさらに強めながら、ウクライナとの交渉でも強硬な姿勢を貫くとみられ、停戦につながる進展が図られるかは不透明です。ロシアは2日もウクライナ各地で軍事侵攻を続けていて、ロシア国防省のコナシェンコフ報道官は、黒海に面した南部の都市ヘルソンを掌握したと発表しました。また1日、首都キエフのテレビ塔に行われた攻撃についてコナシェンコフ報道官は、ロシア軍がテレビ塔の機能を無力化したとした上で、住宅街には被害はなかったと主張しました。一方、ロシアはウクライナと代表団による交渉も行っていて、先月28日に続く2回目の交渉に向けて調整が進められています。交渉をめぐってロシア側はウクライナの中立化や非軍事化を求めているのに対して、ウクライナ側は攻撃が行われている中では交渉することはできないと訴えています。ウクライナ代表団のポドリャク大統領府顧問は2日、ロイター通信に対して実質的な議題が必要だと述べ、まずは双方が交渉に値する議題を設定することが必要だという認識を示しました。ロシアは各地で攻撃を激化させるなど軍事的な圧力を強めながら、ウクライナとの交渉でも強硬な姿勢を貫くとみられ、停戦につながる進展が図られるかは不透明です。ロシアの軍事侵攻をめぐり、岸田総理大臣は昨夜記者団に対し、ウクライナから避難した人の日本への受け入れを進める方針を明らかにしました。この中で岸田総理大臣は、国際社会における重要な局面でウクライナの人々との連帯をさらに示すべく、ウクライナから第三国に避難された方々の我が国への受け入れを今後進めていくと述べ、ウクライナから避難した人の日本への受け入れを進める方針を明らかにしました。その上で、まずは親族や知人が日本にいる人たちを受け入れることを想定しているが、それにとどまらず人道的な観点から対応する。今後もウクライナを強力に支えるために G7 主要7カ国をはじめとする国際社会との連携を強化していきたいと述べました。そして受け入れの時期について、至急実務を調整したい。具体的に調整が済んだとは聞いていないが、ウクライナ情勢は緊迫しており、毎日多くの難民が出ているので、我が国としてもこうした状況に対応すべく、できるだけ早く手続きを進めたいと述べました。ロシアの軍事侵攻をめぐり、ウクライナのゼレンスキー大統領が外国人に部隊への参加を呼びかけているとする情報が先月末に SNS 上に投稿されました。日本政府は退避勧告を出していることから渡航しないよう強く呼びかけています。在日ウクライナ大使館によりますと、投稿の後およそ70人の日本人から部隊に参加したいという意向が寄せられているということです。松野官房長官は記者会見で、ウクライナ全土に退避勧告を発しており、目的を問わず渡航はやめてほしい。在日大使館にはしかるべき申し入れを行っていると述べました。一方、自民党の会合では佐藤外交部会長が、退避勧告が出されており、部隊への参加は絶対やめてもらいたいと述べたのに対し、出席者の一部からは、望む人がいるなら行ってもらえばよく、止めるべきではないという意見も出されたということです。新型コロナウイルスのオミクロン株に感染し、死亡したり肺炎になったりする人の割合は、季節性のインフルエンザより高いと考えられるとする分析を専門家らがまとめました。オミクロン株は感染した人がこれまでより桁違いに多い一方、重症者や亡くなる人の割合は低いことから、季節性インフルエンザと比較してリスクを評価すべきだという指摘が政府の分科会などで出されています。これを受け、昨日開かれた厚生労働省の専門家会合では、メンバーの専門家らが、季節性インフルエンザでは2018年から19年のシーズンの推計感染者数などをもとにした致死率は 0.01% から 0.05% ほどだった一方、オミクロン株では先月21日時点で 0.13% ほどと季節性インフルエンザより高いと考えられるとする分析結果を示しました。また肺炎を発症する割合についてもデータは限られているもののオミクロン株の方が高いと示唆されるとしています。この分析について新型コロナは無症状の人も含めて全数報告の数字をもとにしている一方、インフルエンザの感染者数は推計をもとにしていることや、新型コロナは変異株の状況やワクチンの有効性などで致死率が変化するため正確な評価は難しいとしています。また会合ではオミクロン株の感染拡大による保健所や医療の体制の逼迫を受けてメンバーの専門家から高齢者など重症化リスクのある人たちにより重点化させるべきだとする提案も出されました。オミクロン株のリスクの評価について専門家会合の脇田隆字座長は、オミクロン株と季節性インフルエンザの違いをしっかりと認識する必要がある。今新型コロナに対して行っている対策が仮になかった場合、社会に与えるインパクトはどれくらいあるのか分析するべきだと話しています。新型コロナウイルスの感染と死亡の状況です。昨日は全国で72,646人の感染が確認されました。死亡の発表は大阪府で35人、東京都で31人、愛知県で23人、神奈川県で21人、福岡県で16人、千葉県で14人など合わせて235人で依然として高い水準が続いています。続いてスポーツです。ロシアによるウクライナへの軍事侵攻を受けて IPC 国際パラリンピック委員会は明日開幕する北京パラリンピックにロシアとその同盟関係にあるベラルーシの選手は中立的な立場の個人としてのみ出場を認めることを決めました。 IPC は昨日北京で理事会を開き、明日開幕する北京パラリンピックに RPC とベラルーシの選手は中立的な立場の個人としてのみ出場を認めることを決めたと発表しました。ロシアは過去の組織的なドーピングに対する制裁ですでに国としての出場が認められておらず RPC としての参加となっていましたが、今回の決定では RPC とベラルーシの選手はユニフォームの RPC のマークやベラルーシの国旗を隠し、パラリンピックの旗と歌の下で競技を行うとしています。またメダルランキングにはカウントされないということです。この処分は IPC が管轄する10のパラ競技にも適用され、ロシアとベラルーシでは今後世界選手権やワールドカップなどの大会を開かないことを決めました。ロシアによるウクライナへの軍事侵攻が続く中、明日開幕する北京パラリンピックに出場するウクライナの選手団が今日北京に到着しました。ウクライナは前回のピョンチャンパラリンピックで合わせて22のメダルを獲得した冬のパラスポーツの強豪国で、北京パラリンピックにはクロスカントリースキーとバイアスロンに男女合わせて20人の選手が出場する予定です。サッカー J1 は第10節の2試合が行われました。川崎フロンターレは浦和レッズに2対1で逆転勝ちしました。レッズは今シーズン初勝利を逃しました。横浜 F マリノス対ヴィッセル神戸は F マリノスが2対0で勝ちました。ヴィッセルは開幕から4試合まだ勝ちがありません。では為替と株の値動きです。外国為替市場の円相場は現在1ドルが115円48銭から49銭となっています。また1ユーロは128円5銭から10銭となっています。ニューヨーク株式市場のダウ平均株価は前日の終値より268ドル73セント高い 33,563 ドル68セントで取引されています。ナスダックの株価指数は前日より 12.601 上がって13,545.060 となっています。この時間のニュースは以上です。担当は道谷真平でした。
Let's bring in senior investigative reporter Aaron Katersky in Ukraine, along with ABC's Elizabeth Schulze in Washington for more on this. Aaron, I'd like to start with you. The UK Defense Ministry published a map of Russian troop locations showing that they haven't yet fully encircled Kyiv, but they have now encircled 5 other cities. What does that tell you about where things stand?
Well, it seems, Diane, that some of the Russian advances have really been happening in the eastern part of the country and in the southeast, particularly in Mariupol in the southeast and the other port city there on the Black Sea, Kherson. That would give the Russians and some inroads in the south, make it easier from Crimea to have Russian troops advance into the main part of the country if that's their objective. We've also heard some very worrying reports from Kharkiv, Chernihiv, 2 cities that the Russians are moving toward. And even if they don't have them fully surrounded or fully under their control, it does distract the Ukrainian army from the main defense of Kyiv, because President Zelensky believes that is still the main Russian objective: to get to the capital, to decapitate the government, and to install a Russian puppet regime. We don't know how long that's going to take or really if that's the ultimate endgame here, but that's the main concern for President Zelensky at this hour.
And Elizabeth, Russian state media reports that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned that if a third world war were to take place, it would involve nuclear weapons and would be destructive. How is the U.S. reacting to that?
Diane, no doubt about it. Ominous comments from Foreign Minister Lavrov there, warning about the possibility of nuclear war that would be destructive. This is in tune with President Putin's alert to put nuclear forces on heightened alert just a few days ago. But so far, U.S. officials have really been downplaying this rhetoric, saying it's inflammatory, it's provoking an unnecessary reaction. President Biden was very firm when he was asked point blank, should Americans be worried about the possibility of nuclear war? He said no and left it at that. So the White House officials in the U.S. and State Department and Pentagon have been downplaying this type of rhetoric. Certainly, it's something they say that is an attempt by President Putin to try to escalate further, as we've seen him do throughout these past few days.
And Aaron, according to the regional governor, at least 21 people have been killed and more than 100 wounded by the shelling in Kharkiv over the last 24 hours. Why has that city been the epicenter of so much fighting?
Well, it is the second largest in the country, and it could be a dry run for what the Russians ultimately have in mind for Kyiv. It also has some, strategic location in the east to try and, again, isolate the Ukrainian army. But there's been some very worrying images coming out of that city. A number of shells that have landed in residential areas. It's led President Zelensky to further increase his accusations against the Russians that civilians are now being targeted, even though the Russians say they're sticking with military and other strategic targets. But civilians have increasingly taken a toll, and it helps explain why more than 800,000 of them have now fled the country for safer ground in some international destination, and why hundreds of thousands more are believed to be on the move. And it is a nation of migrants. It is also deepening the humanitarian crisis. The UN said the need here is only growing by the day.
And Elizabeth, jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny is calling for daily anti-war protests on Twitter, saying Putin is not Russia. He's also applauding the more than 6,000 people who were detained protesting the war there. So is there any chance that a popular uprising could remove Putin from power?
Well, Diane, we know that Russia is doing what it can to try to stop that kind of an uprising. We have seen from our reporting on the ground a heavy law enforcement presence stopping even smaller protests on the streets in Moscow. Certainly there's no question that President Putin is willing to take severe steps to try to limit that opposition, as is the case with Alexei Navalny, who is currently in jail trying to provoke people to get out on the streets. But really the question is, how much will the actions that President Putin is taking on the ground, and also the coordinated response from the U.S. and its allies, how much will that put a squeeze on the Russian people so that ultimately perhaps there is enough pressure that President Putin could act? We're seeing it play out in the economy. We're seeing questions about potentially the Russian forces on the ground losing hope. But ultimately, this is President Putin's war. It's his own decision, and it is very hard to get in his head, Diane.
That is one thing I think everyone can agree on. Aaron Katersky, Elizabeth Schulze, thank you. As the war intensifies in Ukraine, the refugee crisis is also worsening. The UN Refugee Agency says at least 836,000 refugees have fled Ukraine so far and projects that number could climb to 4 million in the coming months. But the UN also admits some groups are being held back or delayed from leaving the country. Marcus Moore joins us live from Przemysl, Poland, with a look at what's happening there. Marcus, I know more than half of those refugees escaping Ukraine are being taken in by Poland. So what's the scene like there in Przemysl?
Well, Diane, we are just outside a mini mart that has closed here in Poland, but it's been turned in to this massive operation to help refugees who are arriving from Ukraine to find shelter, to find food, clothing, and also medicine. And that's a bit of what you're seeing here. They arrive on these buses, and you can see another group of families with the few bags that they have with them going into the shelter here. I want to turn you around and show you what else is happening because as they are arriving, there are volunteers that are helping them, assisting them on their next steps. And you also have people who are holding those cardboard signs I told you about earlier this morning when we last spoke, and they are still here for various destinations all over Europe. You see the sign in the distance there for Estonia, and there's people from Germany. Also, I saw a sign for Amsterdam, which is about a 15-hour drive from here. Volunteers willing to take them. Let's go around here. We have a lot of members of the news media also here. But you can see some of the bags that people bring with them, Diane. And it's all they have at this point as war rages in Ukraine. And I want to take you to the other side very quickly. So you can see what else is happening here. We've watched this entire operation expand and grow over the days. Now there are a number of buses that are pulling up every moment. You see this truck here offering free SIM cards so that people can stay in touch with their family members wherever they may be. And I was telling you about the food and the army of volunteers that have amassed here in this parking lot. Look at this. We've watched this grow throughout the day today. And you can see there's a tent for a Catholic Charities group, that white tent in the distance. And then as we pan to the left, look at all of these people with their vests. Many of them work with the mayor's office, and they've been volunteering here. And you can see the food that they've been serving those families who have been in the midst of trauma, leaving the only home that they've ever known, and then going directly into the unknown. So, Diane, this has been a massive effort. And there's every sense that this is not over and that, in fact, it is just the beginning as more families are expected to leave the war that's raging in Ukraine in the coming days.
Yeah, clearly a team effort there. And Marcus, I'm curious, these people who are holding up these signs saying, you know, if you want to go to Amsterdam, I'll give you a ride, or if you want to go to this other location, I'll give you a ride. Are these just regular civilians showing up with their cars and vans and offering this transportation, or are they associated with organizations?
Diane, these are everyday people. Yes, there are some organizations that have been offering transportation for these families, but the overwhelming majority of the people we have met here are just everyday people who either know someone who has family in Ukraine, or they happen to know someone who lives there, or they saw the images on television, on the news, or on social media, and they wanted to do something. In fact, we met some teenagers from the Czech Republic yesterday who that's exactly what they did. They were part of an organization that offers volunteers for community service projects. The three of them were strangers before they joined this project, and now they're friends, and they've been helping people here. So, and just to go through some of the cities that we've seen, Berlin, Amsterdam, as well as the major cities here in Poland, Krakow, Warsaw, you name it. Just incredible shows or examples of generosity and compassion for people here as they endure what's been happening.
It's amazing to see, Marcus, and thank you for taking us through it that way. And unfortunately, there is an unfortunate side to all of this, which is that apparently not all refugees are receiving the same treatment. Filippo Grandi, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, spoke about disparities yesterday at a news conference, saying, quote, there should be absolutely no discrimination between Ukrainians and non-Ukrainians, Europeans and non-Europeans. Everybody is fleeing from the same risks. So what are you hearing about these complaints of discrimination?
Well, we had, Diane, heard reports of this happening on the Ukraine side as people were trying to get onto those trains, and you saw the crush of people, and we had heard from some of the refugees that if they were black or a person of color, that they were barred from getting onto those trains, man or woman. And we talked to a man from the Congo who described exactly that, and how demeaning it was for him to experience that. And so there have been these reports, and as you just mentioned, officials have acknowledged and confirmed that this has happened, but they've also condemned it. And so far, we've only seen very few people of color who have been arriving here. But we know, according to some estimates, that there were as many as 2,000, I believe, Nigerians who were in Ukraine and had to leave. So in terms of the overall numbers of people, at least 450,000 have come to Poland from Ukraine. A very small number, a relatively small number, are from Africa who were in Ukraine studying or other people of color. So you don't see a lot of them here, but the hope is that they are getting the help that they need and are finding safety.
All right, we certainly hope so. Marcus Moore, thank you. President Biden is traveling to Wisconsin today to promote his bipartisan infrastructure law after delivering his first State of the Union address. The president spoke about Russia's war in Ukraine last night, warning that Vladimir Putin will pay a price for the invasion.
Putin's latest attack on Ukraine was premeditated and totally unprovoked. He rejected repeated efforts at diplomacy. He thought the West and NATO wouldn't respond. He thought he could divide us at home, in this chamber, in this nation. He thought he could divide us in Europe as well. But Putin was wrong. We are ready.
And President Biden also focused on the economy, saying his top priority is getting prices under control, and he signaled the U.S. was entering a new phase in the pandemic. Let's bring in ABC News contributors Barbara Comstock, a former Republican congresswoman from Virginia, and Amanda Renteria, the former national political director for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. Thank you both for being here. Barbara, I want to start with you. Democrats and Republicans appeared united in their support for confronting Russia over its invasion of Ukraine, and now President Biden is calling for a new unity agenda, asking for bipartisan cooperation to end the opioid epidemic, take on mental health, and support veterans. Do you think Republicans will sign on to that agenda?
Well, I certainly think the Ukraine agenda, and starting out with that, was the strongest part of the speech. I wish it had actually been a little bit longer and talked about how unique it was that all of these parties in the EU and across the world have come together against evil. And then he could have transitioned into, you know, if they can do that on something so big and dangerous, can't we get along on a few of these other things? I think the issues you've named, opioids, mental health, those things have always been bipartisan. But the problem is the speech kind of went through all the golden oldies, many of the bills that have failed in the past year. And it didn't provide him that reset to say, hey, you know what? I know a lot of things haven't worked over the past year, so why don't we focus on, you know, some new things. You know, with my friend Joe Manchin, we're going to do this. With my friend Mitt Romney, we'll get that child tax credit done. He missed that opportunity, and the speech was smaller than it could have been in terms of having that moment of unity, I think.
And Amanda, the president also had a big moment when he declared that we should all agree not to defund the police, but to fund them with resources and training that they need to protect our communities. He said over and over again, fund them, fund them. So how are progressives reacting to that?
Well, you know, I think this White House has been consistently reminding folks that Biden has always been in the place of really in a different place in the progressive wing of the party. And it was important for him to continue to maintain that brand. But I will say it was an indication of the ways that Biden was trying to really bring that body together. And that was an important moment. They haven't been together for a long time in that room, masks off. And that was one of those moments where you could see the reaching out across the aisle to say, this is something we can agree on and we can move forward on, and there's a way to do this together. And so it was an important moment for Biden himself. It does create some questions within the party, but folks know where Biden is on that issue.
Now, Barbara, Republicans have made it very clear that they blame President Biden for rising prices. He says he plans to fight inflation by lowering costs, not American wages, and put a real stress on boosting American manufacturing in order to do that. One, will that work? And two, can he get Republicans on board for that?
Well, again, that's where he has to zero in on where can he find those few things. A lot of his analysis of inflation I happen to disagree with, and even people like Larry Summers, a Democrat, from previous Democrat administrations, disagrees. So he needs to get more granular in support and really finding those ways that we can agree and get the economy going. I think he needed to do a little bit more on parents. You saw the response from Governor Kim Reynolds, really focus on parents and getting back to school. The fact that a lot of schools were closed over the past 2 years, not even hybrid, is why we have a lot of problems with people getting back to work and having enough people there. So that was a missed opportunity too. But I think in going forward, I think he needs to realize, he's down in the 30s. His reset needs to acknowledge that he's made some mistakes and some missteps, and he has to find some different issues to focus on.
And Amanda, the president called on Congress to pass measures like a $15 minimum wage that were part of the failed Build Back Better plan. So do you think we could start seeing some smaller pieces of those proposals making it to Biden's desk?
Yesterday was a real beginning for everyone to come together, and it was important for him to show strength around the world, but also empathy at the kitchen table. And that's really what he set yesterday. You could feel Biden connecting on understanding what was going on kitchen tables. He talked about Made in America. He really talked about prescription drugs. Those kinds of issues are not only important to begin part of a conversation, but they do set the stage for then going to senators and saying, how can we move forward on this thing that we agree with?
All right, Barbara Comstock, Amanda Renteria, great to have you both as always. Thank you. And many Ukrainians are preparing to fight on the front lines, leaving their loved ones to defend their country. Director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative, Peter Salmisev, is a Kyiv resident staying in the capital there to fight, but he's moved his family to a safer location over the past week. And Peter joins me live now. Peter, I'm sorry that you were in this to begin with. I'm glad that it sounds like your family at least is safe now. But what was that process like to try to relocate your entire family and to say goodbye?
Well, obviously, we were woken up in the middle of the night around 5 a.m. with the sonic booms of explosions around Kyiv, the eventuality that most Kyivan residents, and in fact, most Ukrainian citizens never believed would happen, contrary to what the U.S. intelligence kept telling them. It was just really an impossible thing to believe. And then all of a sudden, it became our reality. It was the first day it was still possible to get out of Kyiv relatively safe, notwithstanding incredibly long lines. It took us at least 24 hours to travel a couple of hundred miles out into the western parts of Ukraine. It was a very, very, very hectic day. But what really kept us going was this really encouraging side of people self-organizing, mobilizing all over Ukraine. This has been a massive movement of solidarity with each other and, patriotism and a resolve to fight off the invader like nothing that Ukraine has seen since the 1940s, since World War II.
And Peter, how are you preparing to fight? Do you have any previous military experience?
I do not have much previous military experience, but, most of my colleagues from the TV station where I work, I'm a fellow, I'm your colleague, I'm a fellow TV host, and they have joined the resistance, and the fight for Ukraine is happening right now in Kyiv. This is a do or die moment for Ukraine. I'm on the way to Kyiv. I'm nearby. When I go there, I'll have to get that training on the go. For now, though, I'm exercising my skills as a journalist, and I basically am an informational warrior. We have streams in English on YouTube. I give interviews to international media such as yours to get this true story out of what is happening in Ukraine.
And it is so important to be able to get these snippets of coming from someone who's directly there and seeing this all with their own eyes and experiencing it firsthand. So I wonder, how do you feel hearing the international reports about how the Ukraine forces have done so far and the slowing of Russian advances so far?
It's been an incredibly proud moment for Ukrainians, and the overwhelming, worldwide support the Ukrainians have gotten and are feeling has been an incredible and irreplaceable sense of inspiration for Ukrainians. Ukraine, as I tell the grief-stricken, shocked, but not panicking Ukrainians in the streets, I tell them that, folks, Ukraine is a country number one now. It's never received so much love and support in its history. It's a crucial moment, and I think the international community is waking up to the realization that what is happening here in Ukraine is not just a fight for Ukraine. It's a fight, and it's not only a fight for liberal democratic values. This is a stand for democracy, and I think Western leaders, Joe Biden in his State of the Union address yesterday, the French, the Germans who have decided to arm Ukraine, the Swiss who have done away with their policies of neutrality of centuries, to make an exception for Ukraine and to join the sanctions against Russia. They're waking up to this, realization, and I think they're uniting in their resolve to help Ukrainians, withstand this onslaught of barbaric Putin's horde.
All right, Peter Zalmayev, we appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
We wish you luck and safety, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
俺たちのビッグボスビットポイント俺たちのビッグボスビットポイントジャスミン次の暗号資産取引はビットポイント
Kyiv's mayor is now saying that the Russian military convoy is at the edge of the city and humanitarian groups are trying to do their best. Humanitarian group Save the Children says they're in grave danger, particularly from the threat of explosive weapons. So let's bring in senior investigative reporter Aaron Katersky in Ukraine for more on that. Aaron, where does the fighting stand right now? Because it sounds like that giant convoy that we saw on satellite is at or very close to Kyiv right now.
Yeah, the estimate is about 15, 20 miles maybe, Diane, but we're not sure what its exact purpose is. It's been menacing the Ukrainian capital for a number of days now, and it's filled with tanks and troops and artillery pieces that all could be brought to bear, but it's just been sitting there. There's some thought they're having logistical problems, a shortage of food and fuel, maybe morale problems with troops that were told they were only going on exercises, only to find out they were about to cross into Ukraine to invade a neighbor. But whatever the convoy's purpose, it certainly is a reminder for everyone here that things could get worse and quickly. President Zelensky has said he's target number one, and defense of Kyiv should become the priority. But we've seen fighting elsewhere that threatens to isolate parts of the Ukrainian army, perhaps to keep them from falling back and defending Ukraine's capital.
And on that note of the fighting elsewhere, Russia is now claiming to have captured the port city of Kherson in southern Ukraine. So how significant in that, and what could that mean for Ukraine's defense effort?
We've seen heavy fighting in Kherson, also in Mariupol, another port city on the Black Sea, very close to Odessa. This gives the Russians potential control of a whole swath of the southeastern and eastern part of the country, from the Donbass down to Crimea. And that would give them perhaps another place, if they wanted to push in from the south, with which to target Kyiv, if that's perhaps the goal. We don't know. But while the Ukrainians still say they are in control of most, if not all, of the country, there is a concern about the overwhelming power of the Russian military. Even if there have been early missteps and things haven't quite gone to plan in the initial stages, the fear is that the Russians could get more aggressive, and we've seen evidence of that overnight with some significant strikes that have affected civilians, and a concern that more could be coming, because when you rely on air and precision munitions that may not be so precise and heavy artillery, that's when civilians really get put at risk.
All right, Aaron Katersky, stay safe, Aaron. Thank you.
We have so much to get to this morning. President Biden delivering his first State of the Union address amid an international crisis, as we know.
And there was a show of support for Ukraine in the House chamber last night. Lawmakers in blue and yellow wearing pins and waving flags.
The president condemned Russian President Vladimir Putin, saying he had badly miscalculated and would pay a price for the invasion. But Russian forces are stepping up their attacks this morning. And on the domestic front, the president took on inflation, the pandemic, and crime. In a moment, we'll hear from Vice President Kamala Harris. Chief White House correspondent Cecilia Vega starts us off. Good morning, Cecilia.
George, good morning to you. No doubt President Biden delivered this speech last night to a divided nation, one that is frustrated with COVID and very worried about inflation. But when he called on the world to save democracy in the face of a common enemy, Vladimir Putin, President Biden saw something he has rarely seen since taking office: unity on both sides of the aisle. In his first State of the Union address, President Biden vowing to fight for democracy and make Vladimir Putin pay for Russia's war against Ukraine.
Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated.
Lawmakers wearing Ukraine's blue and yellow colors and waving flags in solidarity, and in a bipartisan show of force, saluting Ukraine's ambassador to the United States with a standing ovation. The president announcing new moves to combat Putin's aggression.
We will join our allies in closing off American airspace to all Russian flights, further isolating Russia and adding additional squeeze on their economy. He has no idea what's coming.
To blunt the impact of war and pain at the pump here at home, he also announced the release of millions of barrels of oil from the strategic reserve. And he had this message of reassurance in the face of the Kremlin putting its nuclear forces on high alert.
I want you to know we're going to be okay.
With inflation at a 40-year high, the president promising to make fighting rising prices his top priority.
Too many families are struggling to keep up with their bills. Inflation is robbing them of gains they thought otherwise they would be able to feel.
He's pushing for lowering the cost of prescription drugs and child care, once in his Build Back Better plan, now stalled, blocked by some in his own party. One of them, Senator Joe Manchin, seen sitting with Republicans, his office calling it a show of bipartisanship. And in the packed, maskless chamber, the president also signaling a new phase in the fight against COVID.
And thanks to the progress we made in the past year, COVID-19 no longer need control our lives.
Announcing his administration will send more free rapid tests to Americans and unveiling a new test-to-treat program.
People can get tested at a pharmacy, and if they prove positive, receive the antiviral pills on the spot at no cost.
The president even winning some Republican cheers with his message on fighting crime.
We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police. It's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them with resources and training.
But Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert of Colorado drawing boos, including from members of her own party, for heckling the president over the deaths of 13 service members in Afghanistan.
A cancer that would put them in a flag-draped coffin. I know.
It came just as President Biden was talking about care for veterans and his late son Bo's battle with cancer.
One of those soldiers was my son, Major Bo Biden.
But in these divided times, it was his praise for the strength of the American people that brought this chamber to its feet.
The State of the Union is strong because you, the American people, are strong. We are stronger today than we were a year ago. And we'll be stronger a year from now than we are today. This is our moment.
Now, with that 37% approval rating, the president's looking for one of these post-speech bounces. So he heads to Wisconsin today to tout his bipartisan infrastructure law. But so much of the rest of his agenda, Robin, remains stalled in Congress. So the big question this morning is, does that speech move that needle at all?
That is the big question, Cecilia. Thank you.
We're joined now by the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. Madam Vice President, thank you for joining us this morning. You know, the president said last night that Vladimir Putin had badly miscalculated, but Putin shows no signs of backing down at all. His forces are putting Ukraine in a vice grip this morning. Is there anything more the U.S. can do to prevent Putin from toppling the Ukrainian government, occupying Ukraine?
Well, George, let me start by saying that we have, as the United States of America, shown great leadership, which the president articulated in the State of the Union last night. Most recently, I've been meeting with heads of government and world leaders. Most recently, just yesterday, I spoke with the prime ministers of Poland, of Lithuania, Latvia, talked with Romania about the role that the United States has played in bringing together our NATO alliance, bringing together the EU to stand firm, to stand stand resolute and unified around what must be serious and severe consequences for Vladimir Putin, for the Russians, in terms of what they have done to invade a sovereign nation. And we are seeing the impact of the work that we have done. We are seeing the ruble in a free fall. We are seeing the stock market in Russia has essentially closed. What we have seen is that the credit rating of Russia is now junk. So what we know is that we're having an impact, and we're taking it quite seriously. I think you know, and many of the pundits, weeks ago wondered whether we would take the kinds of measures that we have taken, and we have, because we're standing together with our allies, and we are seeing an impact because of those measures.
But Putin seems willing to pay that price right now. He's not backing down in any way, shape, or form. The U.S. intelligence about what Putin is going to do has been pretty accurate so far. Does it suggest that Kiev is going to fall?
Well, we're going to do everything we can to support the Ukrainian people. And so we are doing that through our security assistance, through economic assistance, humanitarian assistance. Again, when speaking to the prime ministers that I mentioned just yesterday, we talked in great detail about what we are doing to increase almost on a daily basis our security assistance, what we are doing on almost a daily basis, including to increase our lethal assistance in terms of what they need and what they require to defend themselves in their country. So we're not going to let up. But there's no question. Look, this is Putin's war, and we are very concerned, and we are monitoring it. We are fully aware that if there's any intentional targeting of civilians, that we are looking at the fact that there may be a violation, very well may be a violation of international law. So this is an issue that we should all be paying attention to. It is atrocious. And it is a violation of all of the standards and principles that we, as in particular NATO nations, take seriously in terms of protecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of any nation.
What is the best possible outcome here? Does the United States want the Russian people and Putin's fellow oligarchs to rise up and depose him?
Well, what we want is that he will leave Ukraine. What we want is that the Ukrainian people will be free and that they will be safe. But we are now at a place where obviously Russia has yet again invaded Ukraine, and we must stand in solidarity with our allies and make sure there are severe and swift consequences, which is what we have been doing.
Let me turn to the domestic front. The president laid out his agenda last night on inflation, on COVID, on crime. The Republican response was given by the governor of Iowa, Kim Reynolds. Here's what she had to say.
We're now 1 year into his presidency, and instead of moving America forward, it feels like President Biden and his party have sent us back in time to the late 70s and early 80s, when runaway inflation was hammering families, a violent crime wave was crashing our cities, and the Soviet Army was trying to redraw the world map.
Your response?
Well, the facts are that in 1 year, we have created over 6 million jobs. The fact is that we have grown the economy at a faster rate than has been grown in 40 years, I think, since the Reagan era. Those are the facts. The facts are that unemployment has reached a very significant low, and people are going back to work. Children are back in school. 99% of our schools are reopened, and that is the state of America today. There's certainly work to be done. We need to address the issue of inflation, and we are doing that in terms of addressing the supply chain issue, and also what we need to do to make living more affordable for folks, the cost of living, and that means bringing down the cost of child care, bringing down the cost of elder care, bringing down the cost of prescription drugs. But, I think that we have seen progress, but there's certainly more work to do.
And the American people certainly are not feeling it right now. At least that's what's showing up in the polls. Can the president provide the kind of relief that is necessary to prevent a Democratic rout in November?
Well, listen, the president made clear last night, part of what we as leaders in the United States, both in the Congress and in the executive branch, need to do is we need to pay attention to the needs of American families. And that is why we are saying, for example, on the issue of child care, working families shouldn't pay more than 7% of their income in child care. Families shouldn't have to go broke taking care of their children. Let's bring down the cost of prescription drugs. So many folks in our country, or when we have relatives who have diabetes, insulin can cause people to literally make decisions about whether they buy food or have life-saving drugs. And so let's bring down the costs so working families and individuals don't pay more than $35 a month for insulin. These are the things that we are attempting to do. The president also, I thought, did a spectacular job of trying to appeal to American leaders, regardless of party affiliation, to come together in a unified way around these issues that impact people regardless of who they voted for in the last election. That's how we continue to make our country strong, and that's our intention.
Madam Vice President, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.
And the president will be continuing that today by going to Wisconsin. Our Chief Global Affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz, our military analyst, Colonel Steve Gannon. And Martha, let me begin with you. A lot of signs now that Vladimir Putin is isolated. We see those pictures of him at the end of very long tables alone. Also some signs of dissension inside his inner circle. What are you picking up about that?
I think that's exactly right, George, and I've been hearing that for over a week, that he is behaving erratically, that he does not trust his inner circle anymore. I mean, think how much intelligence the U.S. put out leading up to this invasion. That was very worrisome for Vladimir Putin, who's talking, how are they getting this? Is any of my inner circle talking? But his erratic behavior is continuing, they say, and his ferocity and intent as well.
And Steve, we're seeing some of these oligarchs, as James just reported, starting to speak out a little bit, calling for peace. I have a couple of questions on that. A version of the question I asked Vice President Kamala Harris: what difference does it make? Would the U.S. actually like to see the oligarchs and the Russian people come together and depose Vladimir Putin?
I don't think it's the oligarchs going to do that. Putin owns the oligarchs. They are his bank. All his assets are held by the oligarchs. So he owns them. If they are speaking out, George, it's only because Putin said they could speak out. So I think we ought to look at it from a different angle. If we hear the oligarchs speaking out more, it may be that Putin wants them to say, hey, we need to pressure him and we need to do it. But I think we need to think about off-ramps here, George. The off-ramps are critical. And the thing that's interesting to me is that the Ukrainians asked the Chinese to come in and broker a peace deal, and they have agreed to that in principle. So Xi Jinping could have a double win here with his Olympics and step in to be the savior of this conflict.
We'll see what comes of that. In the meantime, Martha, you mentioned the intelligence. What is it saying now about the potential for Kyiv to fall?
I think it all looks bad, and we've seen it. We've seen Ian's reports. We've seen that convoy now about 17 miles away from Kyiv. The officials I speak to say that all Vladimir Putin wants to do at this point is crush Ukraine, and they're worried that he can do that. His tactics, obviously, pointing at civilians now. His initial push into Ukraine didn't go the way he wanted it to go, and that has really increased his intent to keep going to crush Ukraine. George.
Steve, can the Ukrainians hold out long enough to at least give some chance for this diplomacy, perhaps by Xi Jinping and others, to work?
It's hard to say, George. One of the things we've been talking about all week is this convoy coming down, and this convoy is particularly disturbing. Most of the strikes we've seen are either aerial strikes or long-range missile strikes. The Russians have very few of those, so what they need is that conventional artillery. That convoy has lots of conventional artillery. It's getting closer to the city. When it gets to about 10 to 15 miles, then they can begin the shelling of the city that's our dread there, is that it turns into a Grozny or an Aleppo. So that's why it's important to keep that convoy outside of 10 to 15 miles from the city.
Ominous. Steve Gannon, Martha Raddatz, thanks very much. We get more now on the war in Ukraine. A tense situation inside Russia as international sanctions target the oligarchs closest to Vladimir Putin, and the Kremlin cracks down on the country's only independent news stations. Foreign correspondent James Longman is on the scene in Moscow. Good morning, James.
Yeah, good morning, George. Vladimir Putin has near total authority here in Russia, and that's because he's ensured loyalty from three groups: the political class, who is co-opted, the security apparatus, and Russia's richest men, the oligarchs. And that third group has been hit by sanctions particularly hard.
This morning, as Vladimir Putin's troops close in on Kyiv, back in Russia, the sounds of silencing. Moscow pulling its only liberal TV and radio stations down, accusing them of reporting deliberately false information as Russia moves closer to a full-scale dictatorship. The words war and invasion now banned from reports about Russia's attack on Ukraine. This as the West inflicts new punishment. Overnight, the US banning Russian flights from American airspace, and President Biden with this message for the oligarchs, wealthy businessmen who have ties to the Kremlin.
Tonight, I say to the Russian oligarchs and the corrupt leaders who built billions of dollars off this violent regime, no more. We're joining with European allies to find and seize their yachts, their luxury apartments, their private jets. We're coming for your ill-begotten gains.
While the US hasn't specified who they're targeting, the EU and the UK have named names, including Mikhail Friedman, the founder of the largest non-state-controlled bank in Russia. He is a Ukrainian native. Alesha Usmanov, a financier who's been called one of Putin's favorite oligarchs. And Gennady Timchenko, a titan in the energy sector. As they fight back, calling the sanctions unfair, their assets are now frozen in the region, and prominent Russian banks have also been hit hard. Forbes estimating Russian billionaires have lost more than $126 billion in wealth in just the last 2 weeks. Now, as many try to shore up their assets, internet sleuths are trying to track them down, like 19-year-old Jack Sweeney, who rose to fame on Twitter for tracking Elon Musk's plane and now runs the account Russian Oligarch Jets.
Originally, I was just interested in tracking the planes because other people had asked me, but now I see that I can help people somehow in Ukraine by going after these Russian oligarchs.
Now, as pressure grows on the ultra-wealthy, some oligarchs are starting to call publicly for an end to the war.
The deal Putin made with this country, more or less, is I'll make you more or less prosperous, and I'll take away your freedoms and you won't complain. That deal is now broken.
Separately, Alexei Navalny, the opposition activist who was arrested last year, he's in jail, but his movement has taken to Twitter saying, in order to stop the war, we have to fill prisons with ourselves. There's no one to do it for us. Let's not be against the war. Let's fight against the war. That is a call to protest, almost impossible here in Russia, but thousands are already taking the risk, George.
And James, we've seen Putin cracking down on the independent Russian television and radio stations. Are you feeling any pressure?
Well, George, I have to say, we've had a number of times the FSB come here, the security services. That doesn't normally happen to our position. This law that outlaws help for foreign groups makes it treason, essentially. It's worrying for us. It's more worrying, I have to say, for our Russian colleagues here for ABC who work here in Moscow. It is terrifying for them to see Russia change in this way. George?
Oh, it certainly is. Okay, James, thanks very much.
Now with new developments in the so-called Tinder swindler case, the convicted con man who was accused of scamming people around the world out of millions of dollars is now being sued by the family he claimed to be a part of. Will Reeve has those details for us. Good morning, Will.
Hey, good morning, Robin. It's a cinematic story that plays out like a heist movie or a sinister version of a rom-com. But the impact on Simon Levive's accusers is all too real. He claimed to be the heir to a fortune. Now that family is taking action against him.
He's the man some call the Tinder swindler, Simon Levive, the subject of a new Netflix documentary depicting him as a flashy world traveler, accused of meeting women on the dating app with the intent of wooing.
He was smart and funny and very impulsive. I shared my whole heart with him. And then he asked me if I wanted to travel with him on a private jet.
And then allegedly stealing thousands of dollars from them.
He said he has threats against him. He needs our cash. $20,000, $30,000, $140,000.
According to the documentary, Simon falsely portrayed himself as the heir to a diamond empire. Now, the family behind that fortune is suing him. A private criminal complaint filed in Israel on behalf of the family of billionaire diamond magnate Lev Levive alleges that Simon defrauded, cheated, conned, falsified, and hurt women, men, and businesses worldwide while using the family's elite reputation.
Simon didn't just choose the name Levive out of the blue. He knew that it's a name that would help him to fly in jets, private jets, take private yacht, take hotels, reservation.
According to the lawsuit, Simon used the dating application Tinder to locate women who he then emotionally manipulated, cunningly bamboozled of funds, and eventually convinced to transfer large sums of money to him under the guise of being on the run from individuals intending on hurting him. The family's lawyer says Simon also conned businesses, one of which approached the Lviv family for payment. If convicted, Simon could get up to 11 years in an Israeli jail. Born Shimon Hayut, Simon was convicted in Israel on 4 fraud charges back in 2019 and released after serving 5 months of his 15-month sentence. Simon denying to Inside Edition he was presenting himself as the son of a diamond mogul. He's also denying scamming anyone, saying the documentary mischaracterizes him.
I'm not a fraud and I'm not a fake. People don't know me, so they cannot judge me.
A representative for Simon Lviv told ABC News that Simon believes the Lviv diamond family is, quote, just trying to insert themselves in the narrative for publicity after the show's success. Meanwhile, the diamond mogul's attorney tells ABC News a civil suit is coming soon that will seek damages. Any money they recoup will go to Simon's alleged victims. Guys, amid all of this, Simon is banned from Tinder.
Oh, there's that.
Wow. Banned from Tinder, but he's out and about in public.
He's not
getting appearance fees.
Yeah, he's got an agent. He's making appearances at clubs, and he's a free man for now.
It's like you said earlier, crazy. It's such a crazy story.
Yeah.
A recall of 1 million Fitbit smartwatches. The batteries in the popular gadget can overheat, with dozens of reports of people suffering burns. Our Gio Benitez is here with more. Gio, sounds like people need to take these things off.
They really do, TJ. Good morning. Yeah, the Consumer Product Safety Commission just issuing this alert, and some of the burns have been serious. Take a look, because we're talking about the popular Fitbit Ionic smartwatch. The company says it's received at least 115 reports of overheating batteries, 78 reports of burn injuries in America, including 2 reports of third-degree burns. Now, if you have one, here's what you need to do. Stop using it. Contact Fitbit. They will send you prepaid packaging to return that device. Once they get your watch, Fitbit says they're going to issue you a refund of almost $300. We have all the information for you right now on GoodMorningAmerica.com. Robin.
All right, Gia, thank you.
In today's Tech Bites, Game Time on Amazon. The company's video game streaming service called Amazon Luna has officially launched here in the U.S. The service includes a free channel for Prime members and a retro channel, including classic games such as Street Fighter II. Sonos is introducing a less expensive version of its portable Roam speaker. The new Sonos Roam SL is almost identical to the first one, but this one has no microphone, so it won't take voice commands through Alexa or Google Assistant. The latest speaker cost about $160, $20 cheaper than the original. Finally, Razer's new Icon electric scooter is meant for adults who may have had the original Razr as a kid. A 300-watt engine powers the scooter up to 18 miles per hour, and it can go 18 miles on a single charge. Price tag, $550. Those are your Tech Bites.
We can't change how divided we've been. It was a long time in coming. But we can change how to move forward on COVID-19 and other issues that we must face together. Six days ago, Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated. He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined. He met the Ukrainian people. The Ukrainian ambassador to the United States is here tonight, sitting with the First Lady. Let each of us, if you're able to stand and send an unmistakable signal to the world. Thank you. And tonight, I'm announcing that we will join our allies in closing off American airspace to all Russian flights, further isolating Russia and adding additional squeeze on their economy. I can announce the United States has worked with 30 other countries to release 60 million barrels of oil from reserves around the world. But I know news about what's happening can seem alarming to all Americans. But I want you to know we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. When the history of this era is written, Putin's war in Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger. For more than 2 years, COVID has impacted every decision in our lives and the life of this nation. And I know you're tired, frustrated, and exhausted. We can end the shutdown of schools and businesses. We have the tools we need. It's time for America to get back to work and fill our great downtowns again with people. Our schools are open. Let's keep it that way. Our kids need to be in school. With 75% of adult Americans fully vaccinated and hospitalizations down by 77%, most Americans can remove their masks and stay in the classroom and move forward safely. The pandemic has been punishing, and so many families are living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to keep up with the rising cost of food, gas, housing, and so much more. That's one of the first things I did as president, was fight to pass the American Rescue Plan, because people were hurting. Unlike the $2 trillion tax cut passed in the previous administration that benefited the top 1% of Americans, the American Rescue Plan helped working people and left no one behind. Companies are choosing to build new factories here when just a few years ago they would have gone overseas. That's what's happening. Ford is investing $11 billion in electric vehicles, creating 11,000 jobs across the country. GM is making the largest investment in its history, $7 billion to build electric vehicles, creating 4,000 jobs in Michigan. And with all the bright spots in our economy, record job growth, higher wages, too many families are struggling to keep up with their bills. Inflation is robbing them of gains they thought otherwise they would be able to feel. I get it. That's why my top priority is getting prices under control. I asked Democrats and Republicans alike to pass my budget and keep our neighborhoods safe. And we'll do everything in my power to crack down on gun trafficking, of ghost guns that you can buy online, assemble at home, no serial numbers, can't be traced. I asked Congress to pass proven measures to reduce gun violence, pass universal background checks, repeal the liability shield that makes gun manufacturers the only industry in America that can't be sued. The only one. Imagine had we done that with the tobacco manufacturers. These laws don't infringe on the Second Amendment. They save lives. So on this night, on our 245th year as a nation, I've come to report on the state of the nation, the State of the Union. And my report is this: the State of the Union is strong because you, the American people, are strong.
And now let's go back to Maria Villarreal in Houston with that group of Texas voters of all backgrounds getting their reaction to President Biden's speech tonight.
Hey, Lindsay, so we are back, and we want to get straight into the issues. The first one I want to talk about has to do with really some of the things that you were surprised to hear. John, you were hoping to hear something about voting rights. Did you get what you wanted?
I did. It took the president quite a while to get there, but he did do it. For the black community, we needed to hear him say he is behind. He affirmed a commitment behind the voting rights legislation in the Congress to counteract this massive state legislation to suppress the vote. And we needed to hear that, and I want him to back that up after this night, because we need federal action to stop all the state action. And I also was glad that he pushed for the confirmation of Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court. We need those two things to make America what it should be.
Thank you, John. And I want to go to the back corner with Elliot. And the reason why is earlier on, we kind of had a bet going of whether or not the president would talk about immigration. I cover a lot on the border. I'm from the border, and so are you. So were you surprised to hear him touch on this, and was it enough?
I was very surprised, actually. I don't believe it's enough. For a president with an administration that allowed 2 million illegal immigrants caught by DHS last year alone, most in American history, by the way, it is kind of weird to see him lecturing us about how he's going to keep the border secure. With the cartel increasing in human trafficking and sex trafficking, I like that he covered it, but I would like to see results, which he has not shown yet.
He didn't give you a plan. Nothing was set just yet.
No, ma'am. No plan, no details. And the area of South Texas, the economic downturn has been felt very hard by us. So I would like to see a plan in place going forward, but we'll have to see on that.
Daniel, I want to come back to you because we spoke with you early on about the economy, inflation, how important this was going to be. Did you get what you came for tonight?
Well, it was important. He did touch on something that affects all of us, which is the 4 major meat processing plants. So I'm glad that is on his radar to take a look at that and see what we can do to improve production or add additional facilities to get more supplies on the shelves of grocery stores.
Did he give you hope?
I have hope every day, but it's good. It's we got to get back to some normalcy, get prices down. That way, us in the hospitality restaurant industry can get our prices back to where we need to be, so we can hire more people. You
said normalcy, and that immediately makes me think about COVID and the discussion that we had today in the pandemic. And I want to go to Dr. Kabir in the back because I think, obviously, in your day job, this is what you've been wrestling with for the last 2+ years.
Right.
Was it enough? Did you get hope off of today's conversation?
Yeah, I think his speech was very nice. I thought that he did a fantastic job when it came to discussing the full breadth of issues that are going on right now. I mean, COVID is just one of many factors. I think his speech overall was very inspirational, and he put in a couple of nice points where I feel that he can potentially make a good, positive impact on U.S. healthcare.
Specifically, pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, pharmaceuticals, attacking pharma in a way where we can have sort of a level playing field for Americans is going to be a nice start. And I think that if he can do that successfully, that is a nice beginning to balancing things out for the American public.
Elizabeth, watching you, I saw you nodding your head in approval in some situations, but also there was a point where I could see you definitely were not vibing with what the president was saying when it had to do with taxes, and more importantly, taxing corporations and the wealthy. What made you shake your head in disapproval?
Yes, well, he's repeating some of the same old tired jargon of fair share, when already the top taxpayers in the United States pay the lion's share of taxes. And also, he talked about, making things in America, right? Bringing production back to America, which I think we all support. However, if you increase taxes on corporations, and American corporations are the highest tax rate in the world, if you increase those taxes, it's going to make it increasingly difficult for corporations to produce in America and to hire American workers.
I was very surprised that we went to an unsexy topic tonight, and that was infrastructure. You're already taking your mask off. Rita, I have to come back to you because, we didn't think it was going to happen, but he spent a lot of time on infrastructure.
It's surprising to me that even though he didn't say Build Back Better, it was prevalent. He talked about the importance of our highway systems and our bridge systems. I loved how much emphasis he placed on new manufacturing coming online, but the only way that that's going to be successful is if the infrastructure supports the movement of goods from those places to the rest of the country. And so I think it was a good thing for him to pair the conversation about manufacturing and the conversation about our infrastructure, because they are very dependent on one another.
And I want to finish off with Rabbi Estes. And the reason why is because we started to talk about hope initially when we first came on and inspiration. Did you get what you came for tonight? Did you feel like you walked away feeling better about the country?
I did. I left the sense of hope. I think he's committed to helping out with Ukraine standing against evil. I loved that there was a message of unity and his unity agenda. As a religious person, it really speaks to me, and also his call out for the protection of trans youth and those who are at the most margins of our society, and that's something that really resonated for me. And I'm feeling good about the state of our union.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate all of your opinions. Very valued, very important tonight. And thank you for the late night as well. Lindsay, we're headed back to you now.
Nice to hear that he is feeling good about the State of the Union. Maria, thank you, and thank you to all of the voters you have talked with tonight as well for sharing their opinions with us.